My guest today is Sam Williams. Sam is the founder of the A16Z-backed Arweave, which is, kind of like Bitcoin, but for data. It's all about permanent information storage. We'll learn all about this today. Welcome to the show, Sam.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Great to have you here, Sam. Let's do what we do at the beginning of the show. It would be super cool if you could please introduce yourself. I'd love to hear some of your personal and professional backstory. What have you been doing that has led you to founding Arweave?
Yeah, sure. So, where to start, I guess. Okay, so basically, I was doing a PhD in distributed operating system design about 7-8 years ago now, and I was reaching the end of that, and I was very interested in basically reliable computing, you could call it. So the PhD was in building operating systems that, exploring the idea of essentially making a system whereby if you remove pieces of hardware or the hardware becomes damaged while the machine is running, then it continues to compute, useful things and basically recover from the failure, fault tolerant to hardware failure computing. Near the end of that, I became sort of aware that in society more broadly, there was a need for more reliable, not at the time computation. I thought that was actually relatively well covered at that time, at least, but more reliable storage of information and portrayal of information over time. Essentially, it looked like we were moving into a world where it was harder and harder to see what is true. And even in the West, where previously information had flowed pretty liberally, information flow was starting to become hampered. And I didn't want to live in a world of 1984, basically. So I thought, well, okay, we can apply blockchains, which are essentially consensus machines over data, to replicate information in so many places that no individual or group would have the ability or authority to remove it from every site at which it is maintained. And this is basically a question of how do we take what Satoshi did with the first block of Bitcoin, which was embed a newspaper headline, and scale it so that it's not just newspaper headlines, but arbitrarily large amounts of data. That was essentially the impetus for building Arweave. That was 7.5, 8 years ago, something like that now. And we basically set down that path. We produced a novel proof system, which has succinct proofs of random access to replication data, which, long story short, makes you able to mine with your hard drive. So you can prove to the network how much of the data you're storing. It also incentivizes you to store data that is not so well replicated elsewhere. And then on top of this, and that scales to arbitrary sizes. So you could fit essentially the entire web in a single base layer transaction of Arweave. But that introduces another problem, which is, well, how do you pay for that? Right? Like Bitcoin kind of got away with permanent storage on chain because it had such small amounts of storage. But when you have a very large data set, you have to have some sensible and viable way to maintain payments for the storage of data across time. And that's where we came up with the idea for the storage endowment in Arweave, which is essentially the other core innovation. Broadly speaking, you pay for 200 years worth of storage upfront the day that you add data to the network. And as the cost of storage declines over time, that 200 years worth of storage purchasing power expands out. And if it does so at a rate higher than 0.5%, then you end each given year with a higher amount of storage purchasing power than you started it with. It's a slightly counterintuitive result, but it is true. And so essentially that creates an endowment effect where you can put aside a single amount of capital at the beginning and draw from it from an indefinite period. Yeah, and so that's essentially Arweave. We've been growing it's been mainnet for 6.5 years now. And we just passed 10 billion pieces of information stored inside the system last week, actually, which is a pretty big milestone. Yeah, thank you. It's like a quarter of the size of the indexed web or something like that.
Yes, indeed. And look, we'll come back to that, Sam. Yeah, it's fascinating. So I think it'd be good. Like there are a number of other projects that are building I suppose, what you call decentralized storage solutions. There's you guys, there's Filecoin, there's the interplanetary file system. But, you made a reference to 1984, of course, the classic dystopian future novel by George Orwell. Most people be aware of, the kind of dystopian future that 1984 represents. But just, for the benefit of listeners, just explain why you believe it is so important to have an alternative to that future and why we might be heading down that kind of path, from where we are today if we don't have other options. What is the threat there? Because I think that's excellent context, Sam.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that actually we can answer both of those sort of questions, those areas in a single way. There are things like Filecoin, IPFS, that they're all focused on temporary storage of information. Arweave came from the other angle and said, look, you can buy temporary storage from a centralized provider. It's interesting when you do it from a decentralized network instead. You can get economies of scale, but it's not like a 0-to-1 innovation. It's basically a capital efficiency innovation. Whereas the ability to store data with a business model that is outside the control or authority of any single person or group, that actually is something that's radically novel and only possible since Bitcoin. Bitcoin's the first example of this. It's a trustless monetary system. Arweave is a trustless data storage system, replicating information over arbitrarily long periods of time. So why build such a thing in the first place? Well, I think that the way that we conceptualized it at the time was that the doorway, the open access to information on the internet seemed to be slowly closing. And I'm 32 now. I was born at a time when I got access to the internet when I was probably 9 or 10, something like this. And so I grew up with it in a very real way. And I grew up during the time where the internet, I think, as far as I can tell from the history, was the freest. Anyone could really open up their own website and have their own point of view and express it to the world widely. And then there was this sort of re-centralization that happened onto the Web 2 giants that we know of today, where you have no rights at all, really. You're just a customer. And in most of these services, you don't even pay directly. So you're not a very respected customer. You're really actually a way for them to leverage making money on you in a different form, typically selling your attention. So not even a very well-served customer. Yeah, we saw this starting to occur, and we thought, well, one of the fundamental problems with the internet is you have links that break. Right? Like you go to a website, the content of that website can change. There's no guarantee when you go back to it that it's in the same spot as it was when you first accessed it. And that means that it's become such a fundamental part of our information coordination mechanism as a society, that way of sense making, that we're immensely forgetful as a society, essentially. It's something around 50% of Supreme Court decisions contain dead links now. So if you want to understand why the Supreme Court justices in the US made their decisions, you can't go and read the information that they had at the time. It's subtle, it's in the background, and it happens very slowly so people don't pay attention to it. But it's very real that we are forgetting essentially all of our modern culture and history. And so we thought, well, okay, set the culture and history in stone inside a blockchain where it can't be forgotten or altered, provably show that it hasn't changed over time, and then make it so that the past is, if you will, vibrant. And Winston's job from 1984 would be impossible. Memory holding information. In fact, we even made it so that the network, each node speaks on 1984 to every other node, so that we never forget the principles and the premise of the machine.
Yeah, very well said, Sam. And so this is why you think in terms of, people being able to pay for storage across a 200-year time frame, for example, which is much longer than than people are normal. It's a longer than a human lifespan at present, anyway. So people aren't used to even thinking that long, let alone longer than that. And I think it's also why you talk about what you call the Permaweb, right? So to just explain the idea of the Permaweb and how that relates to, I guess, the core Arweave technology stack.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Permaweb is essentially a stack of protocols with Arweave at its base that exposes something that looks and feels like a web to users, but is imbued with the properties of blockchains. So that is at its fundamental level, it's permanent. Once you put a piece of data onto it, it has the same identifier and is backed up onto Arweave and is available indefinitely into the future. And when I say indefinitely, we really mean as close to permanent as feasibly possible. Like maximum possible effort to achieve that is, it's not infinite, it's not magic, it's not an infinite perpetual motion machine, but it is engineered to replicate data for the longest possible time that we can conceive of. It has a bunch of mechanisms for achieving that. So it's a web where the information is permanent, but what that also means is that that information is no longer in the hands of the person that published it. Once it is published, the information is in some sense ownerless or trustless. It exists in a common space between all people. And that's very interesting because it means you can build things like permanent web services and applications. So you could go to rdrive.ar.io, for example, and it shows you something that looks like a web application. But that web application gives you as the user the properties you would typically expect from a blockchain. And this isn't just like in the background, the data storage is decentralized. This is that the user interface itself is decentralized. The people that created Rdrive cannot now go and add a fee switch to make it so that you pay them every time you use the service. It is permanent and immutable, just in the same way that you would expect a blockchain protocol like Bitcoin to be, except applied instead at the application layer. That's the core of it. Our essential mission is to create a cyberspace where there are guaranteed and immutable rights baked into the core protocols that users use, or core services that users use on the dominant computing platforms of the time. Today, that's the web. Tomorrow might be VR. Doesn't really matter. The core idea is the same. Just make it so that there are trustless services in cyberspace beyond just money or even finance. Those things are great, but like the services that people engage with on a day-to-day basis are typically not that. Actually, it's like X or their news service, maybe prediction markets even. There's a ton of things, and all of them should be trustless. They should give users rights. And so we're building the backbone to enable that.
Yeah, very nice, Sam. And one of your recent, I suppose, new announcements is, the AO protocol. You call it the Decentralized Open Access Supercomputer. So this is, I guess, part of the Arweave tech stack, but hyperparallel computer. So what is AO all about, and how is it different from a traditional blockchain architecture?
Yeah, so AO is part of the Permaweb stack, we would call it, that stack of protocols where Arweave is at the base, but it's not the only protocol there. There are also things in the community like ARIO, AR.io, as I mentioned before, which is like a gateway network. So it's looking at the access layer to the Permaweb, making sure that's decentralized and has human-readable names like Rdrive, for example. But AO is essentially a decentralized supercomputer. What we found was that this wasn't by design, this was the way it unfolded. Once you make it so that you can store an arbitrarily large amount of data permanently on-chain, you have the building blocks of an arbitrarily scalable computer with local state, not global synchronized state. And what this looks like essentially is that, every computation that you might be able to do in a smart contract system is really just a program and a set of inputs, those transactions that interact with it, as well as a deterministic virtual machine. If you have a permanent log of those things, then you can infer the output of the computation. And Arweave is a permanent decentralized log of information at arbitrary scale. So you can essentially store as many of those logs of computation as you want. Each is kind of equivalent to a blockchain. And what AO does is it allows you to sew those things together with a messaging network, a native messaging network that uses Arweave as in computer science, we would call it a bus, something that sort of delivers content from one place to another, like a motherboard, you could think of it as. It sews together all of these different blockchains, if you will, into a single unified computer and a single environment that looks and feels actually like a pretty normal, a normal computer like you might log into on AWS, and you can, it has a command line. You can run commands on it and build your applications that way, except it's actually under the hood, much closer to a blockchain. And you can have any number of computation units giving you the state of that interaction, as well as in the mainnet, which is coming in a few months now. We're in testnet at the moment, a mechanism of decentralizing the sequencing. So coming to agreement about which of those inputs should be in which order, basically. But once you have all of this together, you end up with a decentralized supercomputer out the other side. I was tracking the Ethereum project since right at the start. And I remember in the early marketing material, they referenced that Ethereum is the world computer. And I was really taken by that idea. And they put in like $10 to, into the ICO to buy some compute credits, because I figured that's how much I was going to give to AWS that month anyway. May as well. As well get it on this cool new thing. And it did very well as a project. It really spawned something quite phenomenal. The decentralization of finance primitives is quite an incredible thing, beyond just money now, but all of the base primitives of finance. That's very cool, but it's not a world computer. It's like a single thread world calculator, if you will. And so, once we realized this architecture was possible on Arweave, we just decided to build it. And then now on the testnet, on an average day, there's something like 10,000, 11,000 of these parallel processes, which are essentially like these blockchains running at the same time, sending messages between them, something like 7-8 million messages on the average day now. It's very exciting. People have really taken to it and are building cool things already.
Yeah, what's fascinating, Sam, is just looking through, you call it the economics of the AO computer, because of course, there is a token, but you really make it clear that the AO token, I hope that's how you say it, is a 100% fair launch token following Bitcoin's economic model. And so you can explain this, but very simply, just like Bitcoin, 21 million tokens, 4-year halving, and obviously some thought put into this, Sam?
Some thought, yes. There's 7 years of experience building tokenized protocols, and then a bunch of thought off.
Yes.
But basically, when we started this, we realized that the technology was very exciting. And I think the people that have really looked into it now have come to similar conclusions. But like looking at the smart contract ecosystem, what does it take for these things to succeed? Why is it that Ethereum, with the same amount of computation ability as a calculator, is still like the dominant force? And the answer is liquidity. Right? Like liquidity is a sort of like a magnetic force. It's an attractor or a repeller. If you have a lot of it, things are attracted, more is attracted to you. And this just is intuitively obvious. Like imagine you're starting a project in crypto. Where are you going to build? Well, if it's going to be in finance, you're probably going to build where the money is. It just makes sense. Why would you do it anywhere else? And you're actually probably willing to suffer a lot of nonsense in order to build in the area where people are actually likely to build your application. It's just, rational. And the opposite is also true. If you have no liquidity, well, then those projects aren't coming to you. So there's no more liquidity, right? And so it's repelling more of itself from the project. And so we figured when we set this up, well, we got to do this right. Like we have the right technology. If we can get the right economic mechanisms, we will end up with something really genuinely exciting, a true world computer with a radically different kind of economy inside with trustless services for both finance and everything you use on the web. Like it's the full stack in one place. So how would you achieve this? We figured, okay, well, one thing is obvious. It needs to be fully decentralized from the start. There has to be not just one core team. Like that's not how the web works. That's not how, well, it's how protocols work in the first moment. Someone sets the game and then the game plays out with many, many different actors, and largely the game doesn't change over time. That's what a real protocol looks like. It's what TCP, UDP, HTTP, all of the protocols of the web, and then Bitcoin too, actually look like under the hood, right, in this like social structure. So we have to have that. And so we can't be at the center of it. Fine. There has to be at least what we call a guild of different organizations that are all incentivized by the success of this thing. We set the protocol up right from a technical level first so that it doesn't need to be changed all the time. And then we have many different adoption organizations rather than just one. So something we learned from the Arweave ecosystem. We got there eventually, but it would have been better to start there. And so that's what we tried to do this time. Second, we need incentives for people to bring their economic residency to AO. We need basically a massive magnet, if you will, to take the analogy from before, that will bring people into the project and try it out. And then when they see what it can do, they will, if you will, they will come for the liquidity and they will stay for the tech, because we think it's fundamentally radically better than anything else you can get on the market right now. Okay, so there have to be rewards for people to bring along their economic residency. And that in itself will be a flywheel for other people to come and build on top of the system as described. So we make it so that essentially all of the tokens in the AO model, all of them, not like 10%, 5% in an airdrop, but like every single token is distributed proportionate to the amount of liquidity that is brought to the system, either in Arweave tokens or in bridged assets from Ethereum, Solana, not Solana yet actually, but Solana on the roadmap soon, as well as a bunch of other chains. Hopefully we expect to be able to kind of bridge to pretty much every other major liquidity hub in the crypto ecosystem and bring that liquidity inside the machine so that it becomes, say, like a liquidity routing hub, something like this. And then people will realize, oh, actually, I can do cooler things inside AO anyway. And they just stay and they start building there. So it's a very, very different model. And we fund it by not selling tokens to VCs. You said, Andreessen backed at the beginning there. That's true for Arweave. For AO, we got many offers from VCs to fund it, but we decided not to take any. Instead, we just bridge yield-bearing tokens, essentially, either liquid staking tokens like Steth, or yield-bearing normal tokens like DAI, using the DAI savings rate. And we ask people to instead just bridge those tokens to the system. So things that are already producing value, and then they can earn AO for having them there. And they essentially have no loss of the underlying capital. But instead, their native yield goes to funding the guild, which is building out the ecosystem. And so they don't lose any of the capital when they bridge it into the system. They earn ownership, and everybody does so on the same terms. Like nobody has preferential rights or access at all, which is really, I feel happy we're doing it this way. This is back to like what crypto was supposed to be way back.
Yes.
And so anyone can take part on the same terms. It's like 500 million on a normal day at the moment, currently pre-bridged to the network. So it's already playing out pretty well.
It is, Sam, and look, that's well articulated, and I guess, bring it back to what you mentioned before in terms of that, the growth in transactions hitting 10 billion total transactions, I think you said just last week.
Right.
And I think Arweave is, because of all those transactions, it's one of the, second or third most utilized blockchain in the world. But at the same time, as you've said, liquidity begets liquidity, and it's one thing to have, this amazing, fair launch or fair. Let's just say it's a fair ecosystem. It's not just a bunch of VCs waiting to unlock and dump tokens on people. But at the same time, that what you said before about the, people essentially selling their attention to Web 2. In crypto, the attention economy does follow liquidity, and it follows, well, at the moment, it's meme coins. So I guess, as much as on paper, Arweave is, you guys are growing, looking great. How do you also attract users, though, and kind of get into that attention economy, which in crypto is so kind of hyper-focused, it's hyper easy, hyper-distracted, and it moves on the, on a whim, doesn't it?
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally. Yes, I think this is the crux of the question, that as we've seen it, while Arweave has developed over the last 7 years. Arweave, if you will, has been infrastructure for Web3 for a very long period of time. Like, I've seen people refer to it as Arweave is your developer's favorite blockchain. It's the one that everyone goes to use to build blockchain appliances of pretty much all kinds. It was one of the only other really major system that was used during the NFT bull market of 21 was IPFS, and that has lost half the pieces of data because it's not permanent. And so of the remaining stuff from 21, Arweave is storing most of it. It's been used as infrastructure all over the stack, but infrastructure is not where the attention accrues. And so something we've seen since we launched AO, which basically takes the Permaweb ecosystem, the last leg of the mile, or the last leg of the journey, to the end user directly. It says, well, actually, you can have your Arweave identity in your wallet, and there's many different applications you can use inside the system, and you can have tokens here. You can own assets, and you can perform the basic things that you can in a DeFi ecosystem, but also a ton of cooler new things, like using agents to execute strategies inside the economy in a trustless way, which is just never possible in a normal DeFi system. And so we think, and AO's in testnet still. There's a few months more until mainnet. People are pre-bridging at the moment. They're just locking, essentially, or not locking. They can unlock it at any time. They're putting their tokens one way or another into a pool to show that they have the interest to move them into AO once the mainnet launches. In February of next year. Yeah, we're at a juncture where, like, you can see the journey to the end user, and subsequently, like, the growth of attention from the wider crypto ecosystem is coming into view. We've already seen this a little bit since AO launched. People are starting to understand, oh, actually, that thing that Arweave offered us, permanent data storage, is much more than just what it looks like on the tin. Like, permanent data is, in fact, strangely, computation. It infers or implies computation. And that can be used as a building block for something like AO, a supercomputer that is decentralized. So we see this as like a very important step on the road, and already the reaction's been pretty immense. There was more attention on Arweave, I think, in the days after AO launched than ever before. And people seem to sort of reassess it in their minds. Oh, it went from just that storage thing that's kind of infrastructure to, no, this is potentially the full stack for a decentralized web, all in one place.
Yeah, very much agree. All right, and another way of getting, I guess, back in front of people, Sam, is, I don't know if you call it a new product, but Rfleet, right? So, more, which I think, as I understand it, is more similar to something like Filecoin, right? It's more like a kind of temporary storage, but it is still decentralized.
Yeah, it's a temporary storage cache. It has quite a few technical differences in Filecoin, well, it has no token as well. That's one thing. You just use Arweave tokens with it. But we also built this because and this is true of AO as well, to some extent. It's certainly what got us started building AO, but then the sort of momentum took us, if you will. But we built these things, these protocols, in order to solve our own problem. So back a year and a half ago, we acquired Odyssey, which is not very well known in crypto, but it's actually the largest decentralized social media system out there. It's about 7 or 8 million monthly active users, and a very, very sticky audience. They've been with the service for years. They They don't spend a cent on marketing typically, and the audience stays around because they love the product. But it's, I'm not sure if your audience mostly is like listeners or viewers, but I'm doing scare quotes, is sort of Web3 in that sense of not really decentralized. So we acquired Odyssey to basically decentralize it on the Permaweb, turn it into an open public good, a neutral protocol, which has the rights and guarantees of a normal blockchain, but looks like a web application. So users, when they post on it, they're not trusting Odyssey to have their identity or to replicate their data for them. They're getting immutable, clear rights with the service. And so when we set off down that road, well, okay, one thing we're going to need is an ability for people to trade ownership in this content, because digital content is valuable. But the, let's say, fundamentals detached cycle of NFTs, where number just went up and down, basically a random. This was like hiding something that I think was really fundamental underneath, which is, look, why do the platforms exist? Why are they businesses? Well, because the content has value. They just have a mechanism for extracting value from digital content that wasn't really replicated in like V1 NFTs. Instead, there was this peculiar social gambling, I guess, component, which you also see somewhat in meme coins now. I think they're just extensions of the same trend. But with digital content itself, there is very clearly value, and there's very clearly a way to trade that value in marketplaces. It's just that we didn't attach the rights to the content. So we built this thing called the Universal Data License, which is a way of doing exactly that, attaching real-world rights to digital content in such a fashion that when you access the content, you are delivered the license rights in headers. Like you cannot access the data without also having the information about who owns it and who you should pay and how much in order to access it. So this was one of the components. And then we built a system called the Universal Content Marketplace. Basically somewhere you can go and you can trade those pieces of content for one another and for other liquid forms of capital. And that was when we realized, okay, that's kind of cool, like proof of concept, let's say. But Odyssey has 7 or 8 million monthly active users. That's going to be a lot of transfers if people want to be able to trade in a liquid market for content, particularly as we saw that bots are actually likely to be the things buying and selling these pieces of content. Like there's just too many videos for humans to go and engage in very liquid markets for each of them directly. Instead, what you want is bots that look at the statistics and they say, okay, this video is getting this many views. I can project this likely to get that many in the future. Thus, I should pay, a fair market rate for it as this much. And that should happen in basically a real-time fashion. And that was what brought us to building AO in the first place. So there aren't any smart contract systems that are scalable enough to do that. And then we worked out we knew the concept for what that might look like on Arweave for a while, but we then put pen to paper and built it. And Arweave was the same. Many of the videos on Odyssey are not viewed very many times. It's a Pareto distribution. It's a smaller number of very, very well viewed videos and a large number of some that really aren't viewed much at all. But we still want to keep them around. Like, don't want to remove them. But we can't store them permanently. That would be wasteful. And we can't ask the users to pay for that. So what can we do instead? Well, how about we build a temporary storage system on top of Arweave and AO, basically completing the stack, the Permaweb stack. It's complete when you've got to the point where it inverts. It's no longer permanent. It supports even the inversion of its own starting point, which is temporary storage of data. And basically you put the proofs on chain permanently, but you don't have to store all the data there unless you want to.
Yeah. Makes very good sense, Sam. Thank you for that. Look, as we start to finish up this part of the podcast, what's coming next down the product pipeline? I guess, dates for mainnet, anything like that. And just for people that do want to jump into the Arweave ecosystem and explore the rabbit hole, what's the best way for them to do so? What should they do? Where should they go?
Yeah, for sure. So dates coming down the pipeline, there's obviously June 8th for us. Sorry, June 8th is actually the date that Arweave was launched. It's also the 69th anniversary of the release of 1984, which is why we picked it. But that's not the right date. It's February 9th. Next year is going to be the launch of AO mainnet, as well as transferability of its token. You can already take part in its fair launch now by depositing tokens from the AO site, but they're not bridged into the system yet. They're essentially pre-bridged. At this time, there will also be the full mainnet bridges, and so all that liquidity is like $500 million as of today, plus all of the Arweave tokens people want to bridge will all move into the system at that point. So that's obviously a huge one for us. People in the ecosystem are building a ton of things all the time. I frankly couldn't keep track of their CIF if I wanted to. But the way that we normally do it in the ecosystem is we're still, unfortunately, on centralized social media, embarrassingly, on X. If you just check out Arweave Eco, that's a sort of community aggregator channel, basically, which just keeps an eye on everything that's happening in the Permaweb and will repost it. So if you follow that channel, then if you see stuff over time, you just start following those channels and you'll kind of like learn about what's happening in the ecosystem by proxy. Hopefully soon enough, we'll all be doing that on Odyssey. And there's many different things to go out there and try. Like I think Llamaland is a pretty fun one for people. When I said like arbitrarily scalable supercomputer that is decentralized, I really mean it. Llamaland is a fully on-chain MMO, essentially. It's a 2D little world that you can move around, but it has LLMs inside, large language models that are Llama 3 variants, 8 billion parameter models that are quantized to 8 AQ or something, about 16 gigabytes worth of data held in the memory of a smart contract. And basically what this does is it's a meme coin run by an AI dictator. We built it as like a fiat simulator. Like what would happen if an AI llama, who literally thinks he's a llama, was running a monetary policy, and it was a trustless monetary policy outside the control of humans. And so it's an experiment in that direction. You can go and you can walk around, you can chat with other users while you're there. It's also a permissionless open world. So people have started dropping their own agents inside that do various different funny things. And also like some useful things like voting on stuff in DAOs, that type of thing. So that's a fun one to explore. That's llamaland.ne Arweave gateway, actually. So ar.io or arweave.net. All of them will work, thanks to Ario. Shout out there.
Yes, indeed. All right. Thank you for that. Link is in the show notes, folks. And that means, Sam, it is time to finish up the episode. And we do that, of course, by running you through the very famous Crypto Conversation Hot Take round. Are you up for it?
Let's do it.
Let's do it, Sam. I'm just going to run some questions at you. Just want kind of quick, snappy, hot take style answers. If you like, question one for you. But be interesting to see what you say. The question is, where would you say that you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum?
Don't quote me on this because it may not be precisely accurate, but it's pretty close to accurate. The only things I hold that are crypto assets are Arweave tokens, obviously, and Bitcoin, and I think a tiny amount of Monero. And maybe actually some Dogecoin that I bought as a joke in 2018, I think, but it's on a Kraken account I can no longer access. So there's some unknown small quantity of Dogecoins. So yeah, I'm pretty serious about, I think real protocols are and some Ethereum still from the ICO. Real protocols are the only way to go. And to be frank, like we haven't done well as an industry at building those. We haven't yet found the playbook for how do you build a protocol that is actually a protocol, not a product pretending to be a protocol. Something that's really decentralized, or at least trustless. Decentralized doesn't even matter that much. It's trustless is the thing we're here for, that guarantee user rights in cyberspace. Yeah, Bitcoin is a fantastic example. You know, Satoshi remarkably got it right. Round one, no second tries. That was amazing. I think, Arweave, we've attempted to build in the same direction, definitely different path, but it's now pretty damn protocolized. Like the core protocol barely changes now, and the growth is still increasing. People are picking it up because it's a protocol. Anyway, yeah. And so that's why I love Bitcoin as well as the Permaweb ecosystem.
Look, I know, I can tell that you're a George Orwell fan, and there's this great quote, or it's Orwell feared those who would ban books, whereas Huxley feared there would be no reason to ban a book because no one would want to read one. Orwell feared those who would deprive us of information. Huxley feared those who would give us so much information we would drown in a sea of it. You kind of get where this is going. Orwell feared the truth would be hidden from us, or Huxley feared the truth would drown in a sea of irrelevance. So, there's two kind of, Brave New World, Huxley, 1984, Orwell, both written around the same time, a long time ago, but presenting two kind of almost opposite dystopian futures, but they both very well describe the modern world. Which way do you think we're heading?
I think you're right that it's
takeaway, Saf.
Well, yeah, I was going to say it's not so much of a hot take, but I think you're right that it's basically like bits of both. The thing that has always struck me as interesting about 1984 that Orwell got wrong when he got so much right was the idea that the telescreens. So for those that haven't read the book, the telescreens are basically like little monitoring devices that show propaganda, but they also monitor what's happening in the room that they're in, and they're pretty much everywhere in the society. The telescreens in the book had to be enforced on the population. We have modern telescreens, they're called mobile phones.
Yes.
Not even mobile anymore, just phones. and we buy them for $1,000 each. And we carry them around, and we all know that they're insecure. We all know that we know that the governments of the Western world even have decided that we don't have privacy amongst these devices. But yet we keep them on us virtually 24/7.
Yep. Yeah, we do. Very interesting. All right. And look, on a kind of related question, I guess the last question really is, what is your favorite science fiction book, film, or TV show?
I think it has to be in 1984.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. I've just been doing a little bit of a George Orwell kick lately because my son, who is 14, they've just been reading Animal Farm in English. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just great to re-engage with Orwell's thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. That was a great book. There's also Road to Wigan Pier is surprisingly good. I would recommend that to people. Down and Out in Paris and London is also interesting, but very, very different subject matter. Orwell was a really storied character. It's not well known that he fought on the side of the radical left or anarchists in the war in Catalonia. In the I believe it was 30s, or the outbreak of World War II, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, in the Spanish Civil War around that time, he had a really storied history and wrote some pretty incredible books. If you haven't read them, you definitely should. Animal Farm is great for children as well. It's a book for adults in the clothing of dressed up so that it's accessible.
Yeah, that's right. Animal Farm is a great place to start with Orwell, but of course, 1984 is a classic for a reason. Just an incredible read. Just the oppressiveness of that book is all encompassing.
Right, definitely is.
A great place to end the show, Sam. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with us. Just close it out by telling people your X handle or anything else, wherever else you like to hang out online. And again, just make the case for why people should come and check out what you and the team are building with the various components of Arweave.
Well, we're building a cyberspace that guarantees user rights, not just in finance, but in the whole stack. And we think that it's very possible that when we look back on the early stages of the internet, the era that was dominated by companies was in fact just a small kind of footnote about how things started. And actually the internet native institutions and services that people use over time are trustless. And so, we're diehard committed to building all of the necessary infrastructure. We pretty much have it in place now to create arbitrarily scalable, decentralized services in cyberspace. So if that's something that interests you, yeah, come check us out on the Permaweb. You can find my Weave mail address if you want to Weave mail me on the Permaweb on my X handle, which is Sam E.C. Williams. You can also just check me out on the Permaweb itself. Just go to sam.ar.io, and you can find a bunch of stuff I've written and ways to contact me there. Yeah, hope to see you there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sam. All the best, and bye for now.
Thanks.